This was a dark week for the UK. Labour forced through two major legislative changes, neither of which they mentioned in their manifesto. In just 2 hours of debate, they decriminalised abortion at any stage in pregnancy. A law that did not need fixing was rushed through with barely a pause for scrutiny. Then, in just 95 hours of debate, they legalised state-sanctioned assisted suicide. For context, Parliament spent 700 hours debating fox hunting. These are literally life and death matters treated with less care than animal welfare. It is important to note that this was a free vote and MPs were not whipped to vote either way. You'll see here how they voted, and the votes in favour included 20 Conservatives and 2 of the 5 Reform MPs. Kim Ledbetter, who seems unusually fixated on this issue, filled the committee with supporters, silenced opposing voices and deliberately restricted debate. 3 royal colleges, the physicians, the psychiatrists and the pathologists, publicly disowned the bill. They said that they had been ignored in pursuit of absolutist principle above understanding. And the idea that safeguards will protect the vulnerable is fantasy. Elderly people will be coerced that ending to die is the right thing to do, especially when it's a small lottery win for their family. Unusual things happen to people around wills and money. For those with mental illness, the idea of true consent is complex and, if possible at all. And disabled people already often feel like they're a burden. In Oregon, often held up as a gold standard model, more and more people are choosing death due to financial or emotional distress. Let me be clear. I understand suffering. It's literally my job. I know how and why people look for an escape. If it were only about me, and if no one else were affected, I too would want the right and would vote for it. But it isn't. This will kill others, the elderly, the disabled, the voiceless, who don't truly want to die. I can't put my personal wishes above their safety. We need proper palliative care where people can have a peaceful, pain-free end, and where suffering persists, deep sedation is already an option. But right now, only 1 in 4 people actually access this. People are turning to assisted suicide not out of freedom, but out of fear and lack of support. This is not compassion, this is neglect. Labour are the party of death, and this is a shameful moment for this country. Will.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder why they've got to this point. I think the really interesting thing you said there was it wasn't part of their manifesto. And yet at the same time, this sort of kind of culture wars, university politics stuff is more easy than reforming the tax code, than, dealing with the problems around social cohesion, with the really pressing issues in this society. I feel like this is just kind of Labor falling into their comfortable university politics area, as opposed to dealing with the things that are more pressing in Britain.
I think it's a really interesting point, and I think the other interesting thing is that although it was a free vote, there was a clear Labour split to Conservatives here. 20 Conservative MPs voted for. Labour, almost all of them voted against. Labour, almost all of them voted for. That's odd in a free vote, I think.
And it's a real example, I think, of how you actually... I think having a majority in a government is a good thing because it means that you can get a decisive government. But actually, massive majorities are not always a good thing because then you don't get that scrutiny and you don't get that debate and you don't get the conscience splits that I think you need in a well-functioning parliament. And I thought that statistic that you just gave, 700 hours on fox hunting, yet hardly anything near that when it came to this bill was really shocking. I'm about a small state. I believe that actually, on principle, if I have not very long to live, it's nothing to do with the state if I want to end my life. But this isn't about, as you pointed out, personal choice. This is about what is right to legislate for. I'm really concerned about people with mental health problems, people with things like anorexia. Do you know that there have been, I think, nearly 60 deaths worldwide, assisted deaths as a result of someone having anorexia and they're being put on that pathway?
I would argue that somebody with anorexia has mental illness and can't consent. But I just want to get Kai's view on this, because you are one of those Labour people. Would you have voted yes?
No. On balance, no. And I think, Esther Ranson coming out after the passage of this bill and saying it was rigorous and safe is quite a joke, isn't it?
Yes.
Because what we've seen in this process, the bill was initially published 18 days before the first debate. You've mentioned 97 hours of debate in the House of Commons around this. Now, let's be clear, it was a private member's bill. It wasn't officially backed by the government, so the fact that it was in the manifesto isn't, that much of a big deal. But actually,
If they wanted to stop this from going ahead, they could have.
But if they really wanted it to happen, I mean, it wouldn't have passed with a 23-person majority. The fact is, Kim Leadbeater, and I think lots of her parliamentary colleagues are quite angry about the way that Kim Leadbeater has led the proposal of this debate. She's been unable to rise to the importance of it. She has browbeaten and smeared opponents and denied scrutiny.
Trey, I can't help but feel here that we're not valuing life either in the womb or at the other end, on the vulnerable and the elderly.
There's quite a few things you said, because I even thought about, older people. Some people have power of attorney over their older relatives, and, if there's a nice pot of gold, it might be the case that they encourage it. But it's also weird, because I've got a personal take on it as well. I was in hospital age 15, and I was paralysed. I went for a lot of my time dealing with health issues, thinking, I would like to end it if my health got really, really bad. I mean, I never would have done it, but I like the thought of being able to do it. Of course, everyone knows about dignitas and things like that. But I think bringing it into legislation, there are so many avenues for it to be abused. And the fact that 700 hours was spent debating fox hunting, this should be scrutinised left, right and centre. It's so rife for abuse, so rife for abuse.
I see the elderly every day who feel like they're a burden.
And that's the worst thing about how this has passed, is it's an emotive issue. That's why it was a free vote, is so many people have personal stories of themselves or a loved one. And but however, we knew that there needed to be safeguards, proper safeguards, and this needed to be passed, if it did need to be passed, in a sensible way. And it just hasn't happened that way.
And also after perhaps a decent amount of funding for palliative care.
Thank
if palliative care was properly funded...
I mean,
which it hasn't
charity
been for years,
funds palliative care in the main.
And then they said, right, OK, it's still not working. Then at least there's scope for a debate. But they haven't even given the other option, a decent chance.
And I think last time this was introduced, I think there was a previous private member's bill, if I'm correct, over a decade ago now, that had buckets more scrutiny than this one even had. You think you can have a proper debate, and we're at the point where we can have a sophisticated debate about these issues, because there have been so many of these cases across the world where it's been abused.
To be honest, I think the abortion side of this is much worse and more morally abhorrent than the assisted dying side. That, for me, is one which I cannot believe that we are adopting American-style politics into the United Kingdom. Right. But surely we had the balance right on abortion before this
Yes, I think we did.
Yeah, surely in a difficult issue, when you can say that a fetus is viable outside the womb at around 24 weeks, that is a reasonable time to put that limit in place. But I can't believe that this has happened.
You know what, though? What we've seen in the last decade is US politics, whether it's on DEI or trans or whatever, being imported wholesale into the UK. On both sides, I think that's a problem.
Right, I'm going to stop you now because we've got lots more big stories on the way, everybody.